Hi, welcome to the podcast where we talk about tools for making sense and meaning in turbulent times. I'm Boaz. I work with organizations on the quality of their thinking and collaboration.
And I'm Brian. I am a teacher, a builder, an artist, a therapist, as I said before, a backyard philosopher. And we're ready to have some good conversations, I think.
Cool. So, in today's episode, Brian, I wanted to talk about something that you might have said in like one of our very first conversations. And then it's come up again and again and again. And I think you even have some recent takes on this that might even be different from the original. And so what you've been saying for a long time is that which obstructs your path is your path. And there's a meta about that that I have always appreciated because it's kind of like um it's 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 such a simple and obvious and yet powerful diagnostic tool for how we can spend our time productively. That it never ceases to be a useful thing for me to keep in mind.
Hmm.
So I think um, and the thing I'm connecting it to is for the last few years, I think since you started spending your time hanging out in ditches, cranking on pipes in the middle of winter with water up to your knees,
Hmm.
um, is your rap about first doing the first thing, right?
Oh, right. Uh huh.
So, for me, that ties into Persig and gumption and
Sure.
all of that stuff too.
Sure.
So
Yeah,
I
there's
think,
a lot there.
yeah. So what comes up for you?
Well, a couple different things. Uh, on the first part of what obstructs your path is your path, is that is the distinction between theory and practice, and as we've talked about, between the semantic universe and the real universe, is that when we are facing problems or a uh, we're facing a question that we're trying to find an answer to, we tend to think that, okay, I'm going to go find the answer. And in reality, usually what happens is, now here's one I don't think you've heard from me before, and you probably would never have predicted it. It's a metaphor from golf. Okay.
Well, you've got the Scottish roots, so I'm imagining you in golf in the
Highlands.
wilderness, not on the
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. With some of those Highland cows, the shaggy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and there is a great lesson. As much as I have teased golf over the years, there is a lesson there in the metaphor of golf, and that is somewhere off on the horizon is this flag, and that's what we're after, is that flag. But we all know that it's only a miracle that when you take a aim for that and you give it your best whack, it's only a miracle that it happens to go into the hole on that first whack. What's more realistic is you look at the horizon, you give it a good whack, and you're nowhere close to the flag. But you walk up to where you got, and now you see, okay, I got to go around those trees. There's this friggin' swamp over here. There's a sand trap. You reorient yourself. You pick out a different club, maybe. You know, God help you if you don't. You're not playing the course, right? If you don't. And then you give it another good whack. And you know what? You're probably still not there because God knows how many par this course is. But the point, obviously, is that you're going through a process of feedback. The answer is not an answer unless you're one of these miracle people. Most people play their whole career in golf, they never get a hole in one. That's why if they happen to get one on video, it's this big, huge thing because it's like lightning striking, right? So we're engaged in a feedback, and this is a lot why theory and practice are different. Because in practice, often we have to go through this refinement process to finally get to the answer. before that ball drops in that stupid little hole, given the distance that it came from. That hole is pretty small. So so the idea that, we have realistic expectations for ourselves, we realize that when we pick a horizon, there's a great Chinese proverb, you pick a goal on the horizon and you keep your eye on the horizon, but you have to step over the branch that's laying at your feet. So you got to play the course, right? And then the better you get at this course, the more you're going to realize, okay, maybe a 7 iron is not the thing. Maybe a 9 iron is whatever, and you get into these nuanced understandings of exactly what to do. And so that's just the external problem solving element of that question.
Right. Yeah.
If we want to get into the psychodynamic
That's what I was
elements
gonna ask
of that,
next, is the internal
right?
side is yet another thing. Yeah.
Yeah, then the thing that's obstructing my path is, it reminds me of a story that my teacher Peter told me years ago. He says a guy moves into a new neighborhood. How does it go? There's a guy in the neighborhood, and someone comes up to him who's just moved in, and the guy says, "And what's it like in this neighborhood?" And he says, "Well, what was it like where you came from?" The guy said, "Well, the neighborhood we came from was really nice. The neighbors all liked each other. They all worked together. They're all very cooperative. They're all very happy." And the guy says, "Yeah, that's pretty much what it's like in this neighborhood." And then the new neighbor goes away. Another new neighbor comes from the other side of the house. He says, "Hey, I'm a new neighbor. What is the neighborhood like?" You know what he's going to say. He's going to say, "Well, what was it like where you came from?" It's like, "Well, you couldn't trust anybody, and the people, they took your stuff all the time, and they're always telling stories about you." And the guy says, "Well, it's pretty much the same way here." Right? So, so all of those things that obstruct that can obstruct our path, there is a category of them that seem to be there. They come with us, right? And those are the advantages of the self-reflective opportunities for uh, the interplay between the outside and the inside, if that makes sense.
Well, so one thing that I've experienced, like, relating to this little aphorism over time, is that when you recognize what's obstructing your path and put your attention on that, the flag, the long-term goal, might change. Um,
Hmm.
Especially as you take the time and the effort to go through what obstructs your path, it's going to change you in the process. It might change what you want, right? It might change what you're
Hmm.
going after. And
Hmm.
that reminds me of the kind of tacking that we've talked about. Like, we
Right.
think we're going straight toward a goal, but not only are we tacking, but we might be tacking in yet a different direction that makes itself clear to us much later than
Yep.
you know than we realize.
Almost for sure that will be the case, depending on the scale that we're applying this metaphor on, for sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and and then um, when we encounter what obstructs our path internally. So, like, there are plenty of, like, discovering that I have a belief that I'm not good enough, right? And
Hmm.
and and then wrangling with whatever I need to um, accept, whatever I need to let go of, whatever I need to heal, to kind of scaffold up a more coherent, more integral self-image,
Sure.
will change what I think success might mean, right? So there's an
Hmm.
interplay between the internal and the external.
Sure. You don't want to climb too far up the ladder if it's leaned against the wrong building.
Oh, yeah. So season reference,
I
right?
see as in reference, yeah. But and at the same time, there is a danger of what I will call anterior proliferation.
Sounds fancy.
Well, what it is, okay, I want to paint that wall, but I can't because I don't have paint. So that means that I need to go get paint. But I can't get paint because my truck has a flat tire. So now instead of even related to the room, now I'm dealing with a flat tire. Oh, but I can't deal with a flat tire until right. And the anterior proliferation danger is that I never get to the flag.
Yeah.
And that's why there is this balance between the horizon and and the branch at your foot. I'm not saying that you don't sometimes need to reassess your goals. I think you constantly have to reassess your goals, but you have to hold your own feet to the fire. You can't allow yourself to get easily blown off your path because then you might have things come up, the topic of mind parasites. Things might come up and they might say, they might develop a facility for throwing stuff in your way to keep you from achieving the things that you need to achieve. And and that's where this does kind of back into the last part, which is first do the first thing so I can do the second. But we may not be there quite yet.
Yeah, I want to follow the thread on like this kind of silly example you gave about needing to paint and you don't have paint and you can't get paint and you could see that just being a day, a week, a month of continued unraveling.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I would abstract that if I were having that experience at some point in that day or that week, I would probably, hopefully, think, I need to get my life in order. And what
That's
obstructs my path is not so much the tire or the paint or what have
Yep.
you. It's
Yep.
like, wow, I'm woefully unprepared for competence. And
Well, I get it. Yeah.
what do
I
I
was
need to
just
do
going to
about
say that.
that?
It reminds me of a story when I was really young and I was living in my teacher's school and my one of my first martial arts teachers and I was kind of like the protege and so I would get assigned different menial tasks to achieve. And I would, I'd say, okay, here, do this thing. Here's this tool. And maybe it wasn't exactly the right tool. And I'd go and I would give it a try, but my agency was not fully engaged. And so there was a good chance, I was probably, I don't know, 15 years old, 16 years old. There's a good chance I would come back to Peter and I would say, Peter, this wrench is the wrong size, or this thing is too long, or this thing is, whatever. And he would take the thing from me and he'd do the heavy breath and the eye roll. And then he'd go and using the exact same tool that I had just given him, he would go and demonstrate to me that what I had decided was maybe not that possible was in fact perfectly well possible. And that reminds me of another great story. Um, I don't tell a lot of stories about reptiles, but this is one that's worth remembering.
Not a David Icke story.
Not a David Icke story,
Okay,
no.
go on.
It's about a little frog, right? And the little frog's hopping along and he ends up in a rut. And he tries to get out of the rut and he can't get out of the rut. And his little frog friends come and they're looking down over the edge of the rut. And they're like, boy, he's screwed, man. There's no way he's going to get out of there. They see him jumping and trying. And then the day goes by and his friends are hopping along doing their regular frog stuff. And here he comes and he's hopping along and he's fine. He's obviously gotten out of the rut somehow. They go, oh my God, what did you do? We thought you were a goner. And he said, well, I tried and I tried and I tried to get out of the rut and I couldn't do it. And then a truck came and I had to get out. And that's a reptile story about agency, right? It's not just about competency. Competency comes with agency, or agency comes with competency, or you might say your gumption grows, or uh, you grow into capacities through your agency expanding. You know, this is almost like kind of dovetails into this idea of time body. I used to tell people when I'm fighting someone, it isn't just me standing there and them standing there, even though that's all the camera would see. When I'm standing there with all of my years of experience, like this huge time body, and all those years of experience are there with me. And that's the reason that my heart rate is slower. That's the reason that I'm less likely to fall for a trick. That's the reason that I might have more confidence in that than what the camera shows, right? But so that your capacity for agency grows over time. Your capacity to take responsibility grows over time, unless you've misread the code of life and you've decided that it's all about avoiding responsibility, avoiding agency. Uh, there's a whole lot of diagnostic categories that fall in from there. But the important thing is, the way out, the way up, the way to unfolding is through empowering that agency. And so a good part of that is in that's kind of another way into the first do the first thing, second do the second thing, third do the third thing. This is a formula that I use to do things. The way you increase your agency is by doing things successfully, doing things that you're not quite sure that you can do, and you do them. You recognize that reference uh, to the
Uh,
Unabomber's manifesto?
oh, it's been a
that's
while.
a that's a random reference, but and I can't remember everything that it's dressed in, but that principle I'm sure he took from somewhere else. And that is, yeah, I mean, we see this in martial arts. First, you break one board, then you didn't think you could. Now, when the time comes to try to break two boards, you realize, okay, I'm capable of doing this. I just have to do a little more focus, a little more, And then the next thing, after a few years, I was breaking five concrete blocks. All right. There's actually a video online of me breaking, I think, six or seven, something like that at the Fiesta. And but there is this incremental process of it's like push-ups, is what we say. First you do it any way you can, and then your capacity grows, and then that agency is there. And a lot of time, all a teacher does is be there to say, "Keep doing it," right? And the keeping doing it is always you always have to keep doing it more than is entertaining. Like you always have to go past the point of boredom. You know this from playing a musical instrument. Uh, but in the Oriental martial arts, in Chinese martial arts, they call that eating bitter. You don't want to stand there and do the practice time number 1,000. 999 seem perfectly fine. And but the more you eat bitter, the more you sweat, the less you bleed in the future. So yeah, but this idea of doing the first thing, doing the second thing, wow, that's so it sounds so stupid simple, and it's so deep. Uh, there's a zen in doing the first thing, and then second the second thing, and then third the third thing. You can't really do that without that be here now engagement, and that's just the first part of that, right?
It's
Uh,
so it's such a simple statement, and so obvious. Maybe you could say a little more about what it means. Let's not assume because we've talked about it a bunch. But
yeah, yeah. Oh, there's just so many ways, and you know, this is related to craftsmanship, and when you're trying to do anything well, a lot of getting to a master level isn't that you perform everything perfectly all the time, every time. It's usually that when things go wrong, you know what to do. You know how to save the piece or the project or the situation. And then as you deepen, you start to see these problems as Lao Tzu would say, when they were seeds rather than they had expanded into full grown problems. But it's like this idea that it's just something where everything just goes smooth all the time. That's not real life, It's like a healthy heart is able to adapt to a real variable circumstance. And so the same thing with a certain kind of mastery. Anybody can sail in smooth waters. It's when you're going around the Cape of Good Hope, right, or the Cape Horn, the Straits of Magellan. That's when you need to have your wits about you, and we separate out the men from the boys, as we used to be able to say. And So, that's another that's like the big application of first doing the first thing, second doing the second thing, third doing the third thing, saying that keep at it, you are going to grow. But it also has another self-reflexive capacity, and that is, why would you not? What are the circumstances in which you would not do the first thing first, the second thing second, and the third thing third? Well, you may be impatient, right? So you may rush on to the fourth thing and screw number three and try to leap straight from two. You may, in without impatience, you might have gotten to five or six or seven and realize that there was actually a step 5B that you didn't get. But now going back 6, 7, when Quana was making one of his first electric guitars for a client, he had a little issue because he radiused the fingerboard a little too much, and a little thing opened up in the inlay, and he came to me and he started with a dialogue that I know so well, and that is, "Oh,
We'll find a way.
nobody's really gonna see it, you know? It's not that big a problem. It's not." And I told him, and I could feel his pain when I told him, I said, "No, dude, you got to go back. You've gotta do it again. You gotta make it right all the way through so you feel good about it in your belly." And he did, and it took him 10 more hours. And he had already, 100 and God knows how many hours into this. But then afterwards, the guy who had that guitar was a professional musician playing in a band that was touring, and he ends up doing these YouTube videos of all these smoking licks that he plays, and the whole camera is just focused right in, and it's all in the high register, right? So it's all exactly where that inlay was. And he came back to me and he said, "I'm so glad that you told me to go back and dig out that inlay." And I told him at the time, I said, "This is what separates the guys that are at a high level from the guys who are just banging it out in their garage, and 30 years down the road, they're still going to be banging it out in their garage. They hold themselves to a standard." And so that's kind of that conversation also about, when is it anterior proliferation and when is it following the principle of first do the first thing, second do the second thing, third do the third thing. What I've found also that has come out of that, it sounds stupid simple, but I honestly have not been able to do this like a Zen practice until I was in my 50s. And part of it was because there was so much crowding into my head. I was working because there were mouths to feed, and I was usually a little bit undersupplied or without exactly the right tools, or something else was encroaching on my perfect creative peace of mind. And so it really is like one of my, I think it was my Zen master that said, if when you're meditating, you have to put out the dog and take the phone off the hook and make sure the kids are somewhere else and lock the doors, and then you get a minute of peace. It's like, no, that's not it. Right. We have this idea, it's stillness in the midst of movement. That's the true stillness. So we say stillness in stillness is not the true stillness, is the idea. So, there's something to building that ballast that keeps you moving when it's hard to keep moving forward. That's the gumption component. But it also has to hold you back when you want to rush forward. In any creative process, there's some part that's really fun. And there's some part that's just like digging the footers with a pickaxe and a shovel. But you don't get to do the fun part where you go, whoa, look at that. I love it. Until you've done a bunch of the footer digging. And I personally, from when I was building houses, I was always there doing the footer building as much as the fun part, as opposed to jobbing out the footer building to the guys lower down on the pay grade, right? And that's because for me, philosophically, you got to eat the cake and not just lick the frosting off the top, right? There's a wholeness that we lose when we over specialize. This is like relating to other conversations, that that it's like, there's a reason that nature makes things in such a balanced way, and we are educated and we're refined by having to deal with that, even though sometimes it's frustrating. That's my theory. Yeah. So so then there's other things. Let's see that. I mean, you can see how a lot falls out of this. Trying to find ways around doing something right, trying to avoid going back and doing it right. Uh, I can
Well,
remember
there's a
times. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
there. Well, a couple things. One is um, there's like a saying that I don't know if we've talked about a whole lot, but I'm sure you're familiar with some version of it that slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? And so
Yeah,
so there's always the slowing things down and being thoughtful about what the strategy is to get whatever it is that needs to get done,
yep,
understanding that that strategy might change as we encounter reality. So not getting paralyzed by the planning stage, but rather like, and
hmm
this goes to mastery also, is like having enough of a sense of what getting from here to there might mean, so that the first thing, second thing, third thing is likely to be in the right direction, and
right.
have flexibility in it for some movement, right?
And
So
that analysis is always the first thing.
right, right,
So that
by definition.
exactly.
Um, uh, uh, yeah, I mean, now I'm thinking, no, it's not always the first thing, because there are times when we have to leap at at the intuitive kind of signal, and that's maybe more, in the context of shamanism or in the context of fighting. We're not, we don't want to, we don't want planning to be the first thing, lest we get kicked in the head, right? So
And yet there are procedural formats that we use.
say more.
Uh, uh, well, you're going to clear the room before you start to work.
Okay.
Uh, and
Yeah, yeah, right.
and you might argue that one of the first things, even before figuring out the critical path, you might call that first thing, second thing, third thing, the critical path. I think is borrowing from Buckminster Fuller.
That's a different strategy. Exact. Yeah. So what you're getting at is like, if you're going to build a guitar, your planning is very tactile. And if you're going to fight somebody, your planning is very divergent, right? That's really a convergent divergent thing. Like clearing the room when you're going to do some energy work, or whatever you want
Yeah.
to call it, is a divergent way of um, making the first thing, or maybe it's the second thing, whatever, available, right? Or
And that's where it comes down to a
clear.
question of your level, your mastership, you know, um, and what capacities you've unfolded that you can rely on. So, for example, I've said that if I'm facing an opponent because of my skill level, I'm typically thinking uh, just what, and leaving my mind open to receive the information because I can trust on certain instincts. So, see, in martial arts and also in marksmanship, they often say slow is smooth and smooth is fast. But my version of that is natural is smooth and smooth is fast. And so, because that's a much more interesting requirement. Uh, when we apply the first part, what obstructs my path, now it becomes, well, what obstructs my path to naturalness? And it's not maybe just doing what I'm doing, but doing it slowly. I may need a more sophisticated analysis to understand naturalness. And then I won't only be fast, I'll also be cost effective. I'll also be uh, ready, set up for other natural responses and actions. That idea. So So yeah, I mean, and a lot of this again, as we said before in the conversations about strategy, is where are we setting our scale? And because ultimately, the first thing to do, if you want to really blow it up, is the question, what is it worth to do? Which is like the ultimate philosophical question, or as Camus puts it, is life worth living? And your answer is your life. So, on the other hand, I wouldn't want you stuck on that step forever and not moving forward. There is a point where we do have to make a pragmatic analysis, And that's why I've always liked the thing that Maya Angelou said, do your best. And when your understanding increases, you will understand better what is best and then do that. And this again, this is the golf game, right? Come back around again. You do your best, look at the flag, hit the thing, but now when the ball's in a new place, you have to do another analysis. Now you know more. So now your best is going to be better and it's going to get you closer to the flag. And there's a formula that you don't even have to, hyper focus on the flag, right? As long as it's better to focus on doing your best, right? So, uh, so yeah, no, that's an interesting thing, and what I've found is that it has been. I've come to this idea of first do the first thing, second do the second, third do the third, through a long career of making things and problem solving, and seeing where and what was the cause of the big screw ups, the times it didn't work, the times that, you know, uh, uh, what's a good example?
The greenhouse
Okay,
roof?
I tried.
I don't know.
Pardon?
The greenhouse roof?
Well, that was a learning curve. Or the other one was when I went through all this grief to drain the muddy hole on Main Street. I think it was probably February, and I had just gotten all the cold water out of there. And what I learned later was I was trying to do an impossible thing where I tried to salvage an old galvanized fitting to get it out to save the thing that was jammed up in. And, it was like I went one, and this is like the visceralness of a certain type of intelligence, um, or the body basedness of it. I gave it one too much. And when I did it, I knew it was too much. And and my whole friggin' hole filled right back up with water again, and I was all the way back to 0 because it turns out I had not adequately figured out yet what was the critical path. Now, because I know my way, I never have that happen. After I learned that and I figured it out, I had a big aha because the punishment was so physical, right? But my hands knew. And after, I mean, that was when I was still kind of at the beginning of that part, and I never had that happen again. And like I can remember, I tried to get a part out of a car in a junkyard, a Subaru fuel pump that was in the gas tank, and there was a little window that you're trying to get it out of. And Brian DeRay, whose junkyard it was, uh, he was there, and I'm trying again to do this thing with where your hands, and I don't have tiny hands, but they were too big for this thing. And I complained to him, and he came, who'd been doing this his whole life and had bigger hands than me, lug nuts with his fingers kind of experience in mechanics. And he went in with the same tool and bing, 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 and it came right out. And I'm not a first time guy with a wrench. I mean, I've wrenched some stuff. So there was definitely like a body based knowledge in his hands that actually learned that. And, so there is an interesting element to that. But back to the point, it's just this idea that uh, we come up with this doing everything in a measured time because it's when things go screaming off the track that we can look back and say, yeah, I was impatient. or one of the gumption traps got me. And the gumption idea is borrowed from Robert Pirsig and Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And, but it's absolutely relevant to all sorts of things. But this mechanical kind of work, it's maybe most obvious. And because some people who really have it, boy, they can do wizardry. And he talks, I think in that book, he talks about an old guy who does heliarc welding and does stuff that he didn't even think was possible to do. But this guy is literally in his hands because your intellectual understanding is not going to help you run that heliarc. You have to have just done this like the wheel maker, right? Now, after 75 years, I make good wheels. Chuang's story about the wheelwright. Um, and that's what the kung fu also. Body-based knowledge is a very curious and interesting thing, but it weaves into uh, uh, our physiology and our psychology. And I think that's the times that I broke the 1, 2, 3 rule were times when I was impatient, times when I was pissed off, times when I was not centered. And so the biggest thing about doing the first, second, third in the right order is that when you're doing certain things, there is a situation that I call struggle mode. And when you are in struggle mode, you drop tools in places that you can't reach them. You break things that you could have easily not broken if you had it to do a second time. That's when mistakes happen. And so a craftsman learns how to avoid struggle mode. And the master formula to avoid struggle mode is first do the first thing, second do the second thing, third do the third thing.
There's another way of putting that I was just thinking about that is kind of like what I tried to express earlier around what obstructs your path is your path just got clearer for me, which is that when we when we have to say, actually, no, my path is right here and now I realize what the first thing is. There's a letting go that has to happen of a wish for what we wish the first thing were, whether it's the easy thing or the fun thing or the sexy thing or whatever, right?
Right.
And that letting go, and just accepting, nope, I got to stand in this hole, or I got to dig this footer, or whatever.
Mhm. Yep.
I think there's magic in that. There's
Well, and there's growing up in
yeah,
that.
yeah, growth. Yeah,
Yeah. Like one of the things we like to say out west is cowboy up, which means that you're just going to have to get a little sand in your belly. You're going to have to show some true grit, right? You're going to have to be a mensch. You're going to have to, step up, reach deep, all that good stuff. There is a magic in it. It's the magic actually of ourself and our capacity unfolding into life. That's where we surprise ourselves with the things that we can achieve, and
yeah,
which is more interesting even than surprising others. Because sometimes we can surprise others and we go to ourselves, "Yeah, that was really easier than they know," right? But when you want to surprise yourself, right? And so there is something to that for sure. For sure.
yeah. So you said something earlier on, that I thought maybe we'd come back to. It might be, an entire conversation in and of itself. So I'll let you decide if you want to bat this around a little. But you said, it's possible that we misread the code of life, and the relationship between responsibility and meaning. And I was wondering if you wanted to come back to that, because that's like a kind of bottom line kind of statement, I think.
Yeah. God, it's connected to so much. It's connected to so much. It immediately it leaps to me, leaps to mind. It's right here. I just read this thing. Now, I just have all sorts of crazy stuff laying in my office here from when I was teaching at the International School of International Medicine, right? Uh, and this paragraph here, it's about the Taoist skill of combining stillness and movement. just a random link, in and it says, the body is half yin and half yang. The spirit is half divine and half demonic. If we cultivate Tao, then we can become completely divine. If we wound and destroy, we become demonic. And then he goes on how it's easy to not cultivate Tao, right? And so in the West, we used to say that humans are a creature dangling between the beasts and the gods, or the angelic and the demonic. And so, what we bring out of ourselves, uh, this dovetails to me with something that comes out of Kabbalah. And I don't know that we've talked about this or not, but they talk about the general will to receive, which is natural to creatures, and the will to bestow, which is natural to nature and the Godhead and the Tao, and which Lao Tzu rhapsodizes quite a bit. The mother that just bestows, right? And there's this idea that when we talked before about seeing life with passion in our smaller capacities, that we identify, with our particularity, but that there's a switch that we can turn that will help us understand the source. And part of that switch is the psychological condition of not thinking, "Ah, what can I bring into myself and absorb into me?" Right? This is a baby. Look at the baby in that first stage. Literally the mouth open and looking for something that I can bring into myself. That's the will to receive. Your dog has it every time breakfast comes. It's the natural condition of created things. But if we want to step out of that particularity and try to see things from the bigger picture, to see life as its source, as Lao Tzu refers to it, then we want to try to understand or see life through the will to bestow. And that's the natural transition that we go through from being a child, growing into maturity, and then becoming a parent. Because as a parent, you have to be rooted in the will to bestow, because your children are mouths looking to be fed, right? So now you are in the condition of creator. So I was thinking about how being a parent actually helps you towards Buddhahood, because here's this little soul that came out of the soul pool. You didn't choose it; it just arrived. And now your heart is completely open to this new being, hopefully. You all of a sudden couldn't imagine caring about the success and survival of another person more. And that's a stage that most people can easily attain. This idea, maybe I shouldn't say easily, they can attain. It may great clumps of hair may be pulled out. There might be great gnashing of teeth, but it is within the grasp to experience some aspect of that. And the idea of expanding our consciousness or identifying more with the creator mind and the will to bestow increases the capacity. So now we can start to actually care about the outcomes of creatures that aren't of the same species, or members of the same species but are not family members, or might be quite other. Like, the degree that we can move from our center out into the world of other is a dimension of our consciousness that is expandable as we identify more with the will to bestow than the will to receive. Now, the interesting thing also about the will to bestow is it generates a condition where we want to see what is within ourselves that we can bring out into the world to blossom. All these capacities that we have. A few years ago, you and I went to Africa, but uh, when you and I went to Africa, I couldn't paint at all. I didn't know how to paint, right? But with the right mindset, this idea, well, I have all these capacities. Who knows what petals are waiting to blossom out into the world that I just haven't given enough attention or water to, or I was pre-hypnotized into thinking that I couldn't manifest somehow. So to me, this, the I was thinking about this earlier today, and I was thinking about the saying, "Whoever dies with the most toys wins," and how I know how it sounds ridiculous, but I was also thinking simultaneously of people that I know that are really, really bright. People that I know that have gone through programs that I would not have the patience for, but they're literally, posing with the Rolex because this is a sign somehow of that. But if you translate it into the will dichotomy, this is obviously the will to receive, right? It's actually saying to the world, look at all the stuff that I can receive, which, you know, f- given the context I just gave it, is kind of a way of saying, look at how I'm still a big baby, or look at how I am still firmly attached to the created condition and not to the will to bestow, right? Some of these people are very well to do and know, for example, that I could get something from them into the hungry mouth of an African child, and I have not ever seen as much as 15 bucks from them, right? Because in their game, there's no payout to the will to bestow. There's no fruit in that field for them. They're still locked into that will to receive. It's like, well, I don't want to fault people for being where they are. You are where you are. And the first place to moving forward is being where you are and working out where you are to go to the next place. But if we want to reach, if we want to grow, if we want to expand our potential, because life is short and a human rebirth is a great gift, then this idea that maybe we want to evolve our consciousness, maybe we want to move more into the will to bestow. Suffice it to say that most of the problems in the world today would look entirely different if they were there at all, if more people involved were rooted in the will to bestow.
So let's take it one click further. And can you say more about, Lao Tzu saying that we can perceive the source if we um, embody the will to bestow? What is the meaning of that? Right, like that's kind of maybe an obscure reference.
Mhm. Right.
Can
Well, I
you
think the
dial it in?
reference is he doesn't use the terminology will to bestow. That's actually from the Kabbalists. But
Okay.
what he says is we view life with passion is usually the way that that gets translated. uh, to see the manifest forms of the Tao, the 10,000 things, and we view life without passion to see the manifest, the source of everything. Now he goes on to later to say, which is very Spinozan, which is a whole nother thread, Einstein's favorite religious guy, uh, that these two are not really different, but that we give them different names and they appear to be different and they separate when things come into material existence.
The one thing and the 10,000 things, right? The
The
Tao or the
the mother and the children,
yeah.
the Tao and the source and the fruit, or the Tao and the duh, right? The title, the Tao De Ching. Ching is a classic. Tao is, of course, the way, but duh is not well understood because it gets translated as virtue. And virtue, it can also be translated as power, right? So people used to translate like Whaley and these guys way back, they might have called it the way and its virtue or the way and its power. And a better way to understand it is the way, the Tao, is not explicitly manifest. The part that's manifest is the manifest universe that the Taoists will sometimes refer to as the 10,000 things, right? So, like he says, I know the children, but I keep to the mother. Well, the children is all the 10,000 things that are manifestations of the Tao, but the mother is the Tao that's nested within them, that shines through them. And, and that's this idea of the immanence of God. Where is God? Well, God is all around us. God shines through everything. It's just that we need the eyes to see that. Well, we're not going to necessarily develop the eyes to see that if our eyes are rolled back in our head and our mouth is open and we're going, "Ah," right, trying to stuff sandwiches in. And this is the image from one of my Chinese teachers who, in China, they don't really do the sandwich traditionally. And so his image of Americans was somebody eating a huge, like a hoagie kind of, and trying to stuff it all in their mouth. And that's almost like an appropriate moniker for Western culture. For we are rooted in the will to receive. We're even cooking up new things to receive. And we'll bestow it when we need to conceptually to keep ourselves feeling good about it. But the idea that this balance between
I don't know.
bestowing and
You and I are a product of Western culture. So
absolutely.
I wouldn't say it's that one sided, but certainly it has that element.
Well, I think that there is I'm not saying that it has all that. I'm it, I might even say it's kind of an IQ test, maybe an SIQ test, a spiritual intelligence test. Uh, but I do think that if there's a cultural message, and it isn't exclusive to our culture. Plato talks about how cooking with good taste is just flattery, right? And makeup is just you know contrary to nature. And so we do have, and humans in general are very appearance oriented, and one of the deep Platonic messages was, don't be fooled by appearances. Learn to dive to the depth to understand the essence, and don't be fooled by appearances. And we've amped up the methodologies with which we can pump appearances. And as a culture, and perhaps now more than ever, we're cautioned away from developing any depth or nuance in our perceptions of what's going on, and not for entirely honest reasons. So the challenge of your expanding consciousness is to develop nuance, to develop scope, to 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 let the basketball that your consciousness can palm grow in size as your grasp increases. I mean, that's what I get from some of the real sage-like characters in history. It's just that their their mental psychodynamic, grasp is so great. It's so large that they can encompass all these things. Um, but I'm not saying that we're materialists and exclusively, but we do have a penchant for throwing the baby out with the bathwater at times. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and
I mean, there's certainly, um, I think, every civilization in its ways has been thrown to excess, probably, and it all boils down to the consuming as opposed to bestowing mindset. And fair enough. I mean, I think that's individually and collectively just developmental. And
I think so. I think so.
yeah. Um, so I'm actually really appreciating, a starting point of that which obstructs your path is your path, and arriving at this point where we're talking about um, what it means to experience source, and or what it requires to experience source. And there's a connection there that I hadn't directly made before, although it's kind of obvious in hindsight. So earlier when you said you want to have enough ballast in your psyche to keep moving when shit's hard, and to not move too fast when shit's easy and get overexcited and overconfident, but just steady as she goes, and getting getting done whatever needs to get done with an even keel.
Mhm.
There's a not consuming about that. That when we um, lose momentum, there's a story we're telling ourselves
Mhm.
that contributes to that loss of momentum. When we get excited and go too quickly, there's a story that we're telling ourselves. And in both of those stories, there's consumption opposed to bestowing, right?
And also an anxiety,
Yeah.
which might drive some of this consumption. You know, Wilhelm Reich brought a lot of things
Of course.
down to what he called fear of life. And I do think that there's something there, you know. Uh, there are certain experiences that I've had. There are certain experiences that one can have that left me with a relatively deep understanding that um, that it's okay. Whatever it is, it's okay. So that enables me to maybe eat bitter that I wouldn't have wanted to, you know, this too shall pass. You know, everything's part of the process. Yield to the process. Let things unfold with time. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that uh, there's certainly a process. You know, I keep wanting to flash back to Nietzsche and the you remember the prolegomena to Zarathustra.
No.
It's really rich. You know, he says you start out as a camel. You'll remember this as I mentioned it probably, and you get loaded up with all this stuff when you're the camel. And then as that camel, you leap out into the desert and you start making your way across the desert. And somewhere across that desert, the camel is transformed into a lion. This is that agency that we're talking about. And that lion fights with the dragon on whose scale, scale is written, thou shalt. And then after the lion kills the dragon, the the lion is transformed into a baby, suggesting that we've only come to the birth of our own true identity when we've been through this process. We've been loaded up by culture. We've been loaded up by school and by parents and by religious teachings and by, everything we've happened upon. And then at some point, we're not just children anymore, and we set out into the desert of life loaded. And if we survive, uh, we transform ourselves into a lion. Somehow, everything we've been loaded with, we've integrated, we've transformed, we've developed into claws and teeth, and now we can engage in a more aggressive way. We have agency, and then we start to wrestle with the line. Now, I wonder if Nietzsche was thinking exclusively as the Catholic Church as the dragon.
Or if there was a Chinese version.
Or
Is that what you're
or
thinking?
what yeah, what all the illusion was loaded up with there, I'm not quite sure, but this idea of the dragon having "thou shalt" on every scale makes it pretty clear that, and knowing that Nietzsche also wrote a book called Beyond Good and Evil, and a prelude to the new philosophers, right, means that in taking on that agency, we now can challenge the cultural download. We now can become our own person for the first time. That sort of connects to me with Walden and Thoreau. I wanted to live deliberately. I wanted to live from what is and no mistake. I didn't want all the baggage that alluvion that covers the globe from London to Boston to Concord of shams and illusions that have accumulated through the decades. He wanted to start from what he called rocks in place and no mistake. and then from there to build from, and so there is that idea that your agency enables you to see what's right. And then what do you do with that agency? That's the when the real question comes. Do you, or as you accumulate power, there's one model that says that the average human's not really capable of much good or evil. That it's only when they get to attain a certain amount of power, and then they either go left or right. If they go right, they become a sage. If they go left, they become mogwai, demon, demonio, right? So so yeah, there's this, we want to root ourselves because the higher up the mountain we go, the harder the wind blows. And so there's only one process that we can go through to do that, and it's involved with that will to bestow. It's, through a higher power, if you will. Um, so so yeah, I mean, and that is, are you familiar at all? Here's just another obscure reference with Teilhard de Chardin.
Sounds familiar.
Um,
Maybe you've mentioned it to me before.
yeah, he was a very interesting cat, a Catholic priest and a philosopher, and he wrote a book called The Omega Point. And we have this historical dialogue. Is history teleological? Is it trying to achieve a goal, or is it just happening its way along like evolution, just billiard balls bouncing along, and we'll just see where they all end up? And there's arguments on both sides. But Desjardins had this idea of the Omega Point, or McKenna maybe reprised that when he talked about the eschaton, or the event at the end of history. That everything it's so magnitudinous that it's casting its shadow back through time, and we can pick it up on our meters now if we're set to the right channels. And that this event at the end of history is connected with, like Arthur Clarke's story Childhood's End, right? The idea that the human race has a potential that is not yet fulfilled as a race, not just as individuals, and that maybe we get to a point and some sort of hundredth monkey thing kicks in, and we all can leap to a new level. Then out of this goo, we come out as a butterfly. But we got to lose our pesky caterpillar ways, right? So what this gooey transformation, again, is it going to come from us all indulging in our lowest, most empowered will to receive, or is it going to come from us expanding and being able to care about bigger, broader horizons, and the will to bestow, and which, the will to take on responsibility? When I take on the responsibility to want to run a water system for a town, it's not just that I'm doing this to feed somebody. I'm also doing this because it's a necessity for my fellow villagers, and so I take on that responsibility out of a will to bestow service. Um, and I footnote, I didn't particularly want that job. People said, "You should do this. You should do this." Because sometimes other people are right, I thought, well, maybe they're right, and I tried it, and I think they were right. But it was, at least out of the spirit of service, and so I think a lot of things would be different if more people were up to that level, right? If some of these rollies turned into, what's ironic is, in the West here, a rollie is a Rolex watch. And in Uganda, do you remember what a rollie is? It's like a tortilla like thing with some eggs rolled up
Oh
into
yeah.
it. And that's, and it's like if less people had these rollies, more of these people might have those kind of rollies, So, uh, but anyway, it is this idea that we could solve all the problems we have if we cared to, but we have to kind of shift in this consciousness. And the real irony here is that when people are in that will to receive because they want to scratch that itch, Ken Wilber's first book, The Atman Project, goes into this. What they really want is union with a higher reality. with Atman in the Hindu model. But it's not obvious how to do that. And so all these other things are substitutes for a deeper relationship with the higher dimensional things. We end up substituting with lower dimensional things. And so, there's a process. There's a growth process for sure, a refinement.
I think that's maybe that model is another conversation because
Mhm,
I'm not sure I could see it that way, and I'm not sure that's necessarily a more useful way of seeing the consumption model. But that's okay. We can beat that
mhm,
up in another
mhm.
round.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
good.
Do you figure we're there?
Yeah, yeah. I think that was a nice run at that which obstructs your path is your path. I almost said
Uh-huh.
obscures, which maybe is also relevant. And yeah, thanks everybody for listening. Oh, and in case anybody listening wants to point out that a frog is not a reptile, yes, it's
Oh,
an
good
amphibian.
point.
Yeah. So let's avoid some comments if we ever get to that stage.
Right, right. Good point. I mean, amphibians have made some progress, and it was totally messed up for me to not acknowledge that.
Cool.
Excellent.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay, we will talk next time. More good stuff to come.